Welcome back to CIOs and Bow Ties. Greg Silverman, Chief Investment Officer here. This is our part 2 discussion with Dr. Aubrey de Grey, Chief Science Officer of the SENSE Research Foundation, which is essentially a research foundation focused on delivering longer life, longevity. So real quick, how old, is it possible to think of a person who will physically never die at some point, Dr. de Grey?
Yes, it is. Of course, we still have a non-zero risk of death from causes that do not have to do with how long ago you were born. And I'd like to fix those too, but that's not what we do, of course.
Okay.
Basically though, the way to think about this, it comes back to what I was saying earlier about vintage cars. If you took someone 100 years ago and you said, what is the chance that the car you're building now will actually still be around working well 100 years from now, they would have totally laughed at you. But if you take someone today who has a 100-year-old car and you ask them what's the chance that this car will still be around 100 more years in the future, they'll say, well, sure, why not?
Okay, let me challenge that analogy for a second. I see nothing wrong with the analogy, but here's a counterpoint to it. I don't see many 100-year-old cars driving on the road today. In fact, all the 100-year-old antique cars I know of are parked in garages and are only brought out for select showings and the like. So in other words, the models today are better performing and arguably have a longer life, or they're safer. So, how does that fit into your analogy?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, this is a shortcoming of the analogy, but not a shortcoming that in any way weakens the analogy. The point, of course, is that people only care to a certain extent about their cars. And people who own vintage cars, they're in love with them, and they have the option. Either they use them all the time, or they use them only occasionally. And if they use them all the time, then that means more work in terms of the frequency and the thoroughness with which they have to do the preventative maintenance. Similarly, as you say, modern cars are more functional. We have improved the design of cars over the years, and therefore most people don't want a vintage car in the first place. Whereas we don't have that option for the human body. So as far as I'm concerned, the analogy is limited, but still it's a very useful analogy.
Okay. Well, I was hoping you'd go towards, enhancements in the future for the human race.
Well, okay, let me talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, please do.
I'm certainly not against the idea of enhancements. If people want to have, wings or gills or whatever, no problem. But right. But the point here is that the actual technology that might be able to deliver those enhancements is the same technology that will deliver the therapies that allow people to stay in a good state of health, irrespective of how long ago they were born. Gene therapies, stem cell therapies, the same kind of thing.
Okay. All right. Well, that opens up a nice new discussion point. So I love the way, in many instances, looking at biotech, it's very difficult to thread the needle through and to understand where all the research and what all is going on. But I love your 7 pillars because it actually just is quite easy to understand that here are, 7 groups to tackle, and you'll be expending research and dollars and time and effort on each. We don't have time to get into all of them, but the one that does intrigue me is the CRISPR Cas delivery mechanism, and I believe from my research you have some research or some companies that are focused on the delivery of CRISPR Cas. So maybe tell us a little bit from the novice perspective what CRISPR Cas does. It's gene editing. Sorry to burst your bubble there, but tell us a little bit about it and the actual delivery mechanism. Where is it today, and what does the research look like about the future of CRISPR Cas?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, let us be clear that this is not really our research. The CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which kind of burst on the scene less than a decade ago, is being used by everybody. It's an enabling technology that lets us edit the genome in very, precise, rationally designed ways. And this is useful for all manner of medical research and indeed other research. So we are not trying to innovate with regard to the CRISPR-Cas9 area. We are simply keeping up to speed with other people's innovation. Because we're quite a small organization, the things that we do, we prioritize things that other people are not doing. Now, there is one thing we are doing in this space because other people are not doing it, and indeed CRISPR-Cas9 on its own is unable to do it. And that is inserting large amounts of DNA into the chromosome. When I say large, I don't mean really large. I mean like, maybe 100 kilobases. So that's like 1% of a typical chromosome. But still, larger than the amount that existing techniques can do. This is important for us because a lot of the damage repair approaches that we are developing will only be able to be implemented by introducing new genes. And so in total, we're going to have to introduce quite a lot of new genes, maybe upwards of 20 or 30. And that means that we need a new mechanism. So we do have a project which is looking at that. It may involve CRISPR-Cas9 technology as part of the solution, but we are also developing very innovative things to go with that will actually allow us to deliver this large cargo.
Okay. Well, let's another topic I know everyone is interested in, and that is cancer. It's a huge field, and I think you spoke a little bit about the research you were doing, maybe on telomeres, if I said that correctly. But maybe speak to us a little bit about cancer as kind of one of the pillars, and your various research areas that are looking at that.
Sure, totally. So cell division is an extraordinarily powerful and broad-ranging rejuvenation mechanism. The organisms that we know of which live a long time are ones that, a long time, other things being taken into account, like, for example, even though they are small or even though they are poorly evolved, these organisms tend to be ones in which all of the cells, or most of the cells, continue dividing throughout life. Whereas, of course, in mammals and in human beings, that's not the case. Most of our cells stop dividing. In fact, many of our cells become unable to divide. And that means that, first of all, they can no longer dilute away the garbage that they are creating inside themselves, because that's what would happen if a cell divides. It obviously dilutes the garbage. Similarly, you can't have any genetic selection because there's no cell division. We are always looking at other organisms to get clues for how to develop these damage repair and damage elimination technologies. But at the end of the day, we have to cope with the fact that most of our cells don't divide. Now, one alternative might be to encourage those cells to divide when they normally would not. But the difficulty there, of course, is cancer. Because cancer is a disease of excessive cell division. And even though most people don't get cancer until late life, if at all, nevertheless, all of us, even in young adulthood, we are chock full of cells that are nearly cancerous. In other words, cells that have accumulated some or even most of the mutations that they would require in order to become properly cancerous. And it's just that they haven't acquired them all. So it's rather important not to kind of push them over the edge. And in fact, encouraging cells to divide a little bit is the worst thing you can do, because cell division is mutagenic. Whenever a cell divides, of course, the DNA has to be replicated, has to be copied.
Right.
And the copying process is not perfect, and that's the main source of mutations. We have to be terribly, terribly careful. In fact, it is not far off the truth to describe aging as a balance between cancer and everything else. Like that. Basically, most of aging arises as a side effect of the body's evolved minimization of the risk of cancer. All right, so in theory, therefore, if we had a magic wand and we could just eliminate cancer completely, then suddenly our problem of fixing every other aspect of aging would become a lot easier, because we would be able to encourage cell division, without any
stop it when you need to.
downside. It wouldn't be the whole story. We wouldn't be fixing, for example, stiffening of the extracellular matrix that I talked about, but it would be a lot of the story. So we'd love to do that. Of course, we have. And it's really hard, because different cancers have different mutations, and therefore they have different, therapies that might work. But luckily, there's one huge universal Achilles heel that cancers have, and that is the telomere, the end of the chromosome. The whole machinery of replicating DNA that is required, obviously, for cell division has only evolved once in the whole history of life. And it's really, really elaborate. And there's this enormous gap. There's this enormous thing that it doesn't do. Namely, it doesn't properly copy the ends of chromosomes. So whenever DNA is replicated, the ends of the chromosomes get a little bit shorter. And of course, this can't go on, right? Something's got to give, because if that carries on happening throughout life, and in particular if it carries on happening from generation to generation, you end up with no chromosome, and you're screwed, right? So what evolution has done is invented a compensation mechanism called telomerase, which is an enzyme that adds meaningless DNA onto the end of the chromosome to compensate for the shortening that happens through DNA replication. And sure enough, if you now go back to cancer, what's going on, of course, is that cancer is dividing and dividing and dividing. How does it do this? If it just carried on regardless, then the cancer would just divide itself into oblivion by the chromosomes getting critically short. But actually what happens is that cancers turn on this enzyme, telomerase. They activate it so that they can divide indefinitely, just like the cells that go from one generation to the next.
Okay.
So an anti-cancer therapy, a clear concept for an anti-cancer therapy would be to stop that from happening, to prevent cancer cells from turning telomerase on. And we've been looking at ways of doing that. And actually, a group that we're working closely with from Texas has developed a particularly ingenious and powerful way to do it, which has already been spun out into a company, and I've been helping them get funding and everything. So I believe that this is a very promising approach. In addition, we also have the possibility to make the immune system better at getting rid of cancer cells. So cancer cells are a bit different, of course. They've got mutations, so they do things that most cells don't do. And the immune system very often picks up on that and is able to say, oh dear, this cell looks unhappy, let's get rid of it. And so, in fact, we would all die of cancer really young if it were not for the immune system. The immune system gets rid of the vast majority of cancers before we even notice them. But it doesn't get rid of all of them. So there are a bunch of ways, including some ways that have been developed only in recent years, which we can use to enhance that, to get the immune system to be a bit more perceptive about getting rid of cancers. So really, those are the two approaches that are leading the way right now: telomere-based and immune-based.
Okay. Certainly is interesting. Get out of my depth real quick on this one. Yeah. Let's just switch to a little bit more of something that I could understand. And not pointing towards your research or anyone's research, but when I come across the topic of longevity, I seldom ever hear about the psychological effects on a person living to 150, 200 years or whatever it is. I just couldn't imagine it. And the reason I say that is because I think at the base of the emotion of fear is this fear of death. That is kind of what fuels most fear at its absolute base. And now if you're removing that fear of death, it's going to have some kind of psychological implications on on the human being, of which I have no idea what they would be.
All
So
right.
I'm just curious about your comment around the psychological effect. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, and I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying absolutely it can be done, and we will do it. But I'm wondering about the human species from a psychological point of view.
Yeah. So this is a perfectly valid question, and I want to address it at a number of different levels. The first one is, actually, I think you're not exactly correct that people have a fear of death in that way. They do, but a much bigger fear is the fear of long-term frailty and, decrepitude. That's what people were really scared of, is getting Alzheimer's disease and staying alive for another decade or more in a bad state. Especially, they think about being dependent on their kids or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That is what terrifies people the most. And people, many people would prefer to die than to get into that state, which kind of makes sense. So it's rather a good thing that our goal is to stop people from getting sick in the first place. And that's why I always spend a lot of effort really aggressively emphasizing that we don't work on longevity at all. We only work on health, and longevity is purely a side effect. That's an important thing to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Then in terms of living a long time, well, there's a couple of aspects to that. So first of all, there's the psychological aspect of thinking that you're going to live a long time. Now, that comes in two ways. Number one, you may be more risk averse, right?
Right.
Which is reasonable. Now, some people think, well, that's a real problem. You won't want to leave the house. But of course, there are two ways to address a risk that you care about. One is not to do the risky thing, but the other way is to throw money at the problem, essentially to make the thing less risky. And of course, that's exactly what we're doing with, for example, the development of self-driving cars that are going to have far fewer crashes.
Mm-hmm.
So I really don't think that's much of an issue in the long run. But then another psychological aspect to it is people say, oh dear, won't my brain fill up? How's the brain going to work when it hasn't been evolved?
Right.
That really isn't a problem either, because we know how the brain works only a little bit, but even from what little we do know, we know that it works in a kind of holographic way, where each individual memory that we have or opinion that we have is not stored in just one neuron or one connection between neurons. In fact, it's stored in this kind of distributed way. And that's useful because it means that even at our age, even in today's normal age, people are forgetting things and learning new things at about the same rate. So it's already in kind of equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to start to carry on just being true because, of course, we only forget things that we don't care about. Whenever there's something we learned a long time ago, but it's a useful piece of information, it's something that we will recall every so often. And the process of recalling a memory reinforces it. So we only forget the things that not only we learned them a long time ago, but also they don't matter. So it's no big deal.
Okay, I'll agree to disagree on some of those points. I don't know you very well, and you don't know me, but I'm assuming that you've had some tough psychological moments in your life, as have I, as have most living human beings. To the point where life to a degree can be classified as suffering on some level.
Yeah, no, I've not had that. And furthermore, as far as I'm concerned, the whole point of all of this really is to improve people's quality of life as well as quantity. And when I say quality, I don't only mean physical quality. As far as I'm concerned, at the moment, we have to live with this enormous amount of expense that arises from people getting sick when they get old. We're going to have all that money, right? There's all manner of ways in which society is going to become progressively more prosperous, and we have a choice about how to use that prosperity. To my mind, a large part of what we're going to use it on is precisely the kinds of things you just said.
Oh yeah, and that would be terrific if we could apply that wealth to reducing human suffering. That would be great. Anyway,
that's what it's all about, and a big part of that is education. People boredom. People actually often say to me, they really do say with a straight face, they say, "Well, this doesn't sound much good. What would I do with all that life? It'd be so boring." you know, and when I recover my composure and stop saying that they're complete idiots, I say, well, hang on, how come people get bored? The answer is because they haven't been told how to get the most out of life. They haven't been educated. And the more time we have and the more prosperity we have, the more we can educate people to make the most.
Yeah, no, I'm all for that. All right, Dr. de Grey, we're going to take one more last short break, and then we are going to get into the investment side of things. Ultimately, this is an investment-focused podcast. So bear with us all, and we'll be right back.